those that are coming back, welcome back, and to those that are new, welcome to my YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. Today we are going to be talking about factorization. Factorization is a section in mathematics which requires us to insert brackets by factoring out a common factor. We have four types of factorization, namely common factor, grouping, difference between two squares, and then quadratic trinomials. We are going to start with the first two, which are sort of brother and sister. They are related to each other. The first one, which is the general one that you should always look out for first, is the factorization by common factor. That is when you see that this factorization does not require you to use the other three, and usually this is the first one that you always look out for. Now I see, like here I have a common factor. I have 8y squared minus 6y. They all have y in common. Remember, when you're factorizing, we are not looking for like terms because we are factorizing already simplified expressions. Now, if we look at these two terms, we have 8 and 6, and we factor out the highest common factor. We need to always factor out the highest common factor because we don't want to have expressions that still needs us to factorize inside our brackets. So we want to make sure that we factorize once and for all. So we factor out, I repeat, highest common factor. And the highest common factor of 8 and 6 is 2. So we factor out 2. Then we look at our variable. Look for variables which are appearing at both terms. By appearing at both terms, I mean if there is y, whether it's y to the power 2, whatever the number that is power 2, as long as I see the base is y and there's also a base y there, then there's a common variable as well. So that common variable will have to appear outside part of your common factors as well. But please make sure that when you put the y outside, always look for which one is the smallest power. Which one has the smallest power? We know that when there's nothing, there's 1. So if there's a y to the power 1 and a y to the power 2, and we know that 1 is smaller than 2, we know we are going to have y outside. Then we know, okay, now we have factored out our common factor, our highest common factor. So we need now to open our bracket. Okay, then you ask ourselves, it's like we are dividing each term with what is outside here. So if we divide this term by that, we know 2 goes in 8 4 times, and we know that if we are dividing, we subtract the powers. Divide each of the terms that was given to us in our original expression, and we divide it with our common factor, the one that we have now just written outside our bracket. We divide the number, 8 divided by 2 gives us 4, and we subtract the powers because that's what we do in division. So we are going to subtract the power. Remember, there's a 1 here, and if I take 1 from 2, I'm left with just y. Then I write down my minus. Then I ask myself, 6 divided by 2 gives me 3. Then the y is already outside because 1 minus 1 is nothing. So y is already represented outside. In a way, I should be able to confirm that if I remove these brackets, remember how we expand? And we said factorization is the opposite of expand. So if we decide to remove the brackets, it should take us back there. It does not now mean that every time that you are able to remove the brackets and go back to the original expression is right. That means you factorized correctly, because there are times when you have not used the highest common factor. Although it will take you back there, it's still not the right way of factorization because you have to factor out a highest common factor. B, we still look at our coefficients. We see that there's 3 and 3 there, so they have the highest common factor for the coefficient is 3. Then we go to the variables. We see there's a base m here and a base m there. And if this is to the power 1, we know that the one that is smaller, that's what we put outside. And then there's also an n and an n there, so it means there's also going to be n outside. However, we are going to have the n that is powered to 1 because we should always choose the one that has the smaller power. Please, if you see that there was a 2 here and a 2 there, meaning my powers are now 3 and 2, of whether it's m or n, it does not mean that now you should just put n. You only put n there because it's one of them, one of the powers that you were given for n. Then we open our brackets. We ask ourselves, 3 go in itself 1 time. We know that if we might need to write that 1. We write it just so that because if it's the only thing that is left there, we need to have it there. But if there's variables there, I need to remove it because in algebra, when we have 1 in a variable, we just write the variable down. So because this is power 1, if I divide, I subtract the power, m is already outside, so it's fine. And this is 1. If I take from 3, I take out 1, I'm going to be left with n to the power of 2. That means this 1 is not quite necessary there, so I can get rid of that. Then I write down my sign. 3 is already out. M, there's m to the power 1 outside, so if I take 1 from these 3, I have m to the power of 2, and n is already outside, so I'm just going to write down m to the power of 2, and I'm done. What I was saying is, make sure that inside this bracket I cannot factorize again. Look that, okay, there's no possible factorization that I can apply here, so that tells you I'm done. Then we go to the last one. We now have 3 terms, so it doesn't mean we'll always just have 2 terms. We could even have 5 terms for a common factor. So here we have 3 terms. We now ask ourselves, so our coefficients are 1, 7, and 8. There is the only common factor of 7 and 8 and 1 is 1. So it does not serve any purpose to use a 1 outside there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go straight to my variables, because obviously the coefficients do not have a highest common factor. So to factorize the variables, I'm going to look at the powers. I have a. So a is appearing at both terms, meaning it's going to appear outside as well. But I see there's a to the power 4, a to the power 3, and a to the power 1. We said we choose the one that is powered to the smaller number, so it means we're just going to have a. We are already opening our brackets because there's b here, b there, but it's not there. And as long as it's only appearing at some terms and not all terms, we cannot have it outside. Only what is appearing at both terms, but we choose the smaller one. So we open our brackets and then we ask ourselves, okay, we are going to divide the numbers, but because there's no coefficient outside, it's just 1. Not quite that there's no coefficient, there's 1. So it does not mean anything to keep dividing a number by 1, because we know we will get that number. So what we're going to do is just subtract the powers of a. So since we have 1a outside, we take 1 out of 4, we'll have y to the power of 3. Plus, we have 7 already because there is only 1, so 7 divided by 1 is 7. And a to the power of 2 because the 1 is already out. So if I multiply it, it's going to take me back there. And then the b squared just comes down because there is no b outside the bracket for me to subtract the powers. So I'll say minus 8. A is already out, so I'm just going to go to b to the power of 3, and I close that bracket. Then we go to grouping. Now, what we do is we are going to apply the same methods. We are going to apply common factor, except that we add a little bit more. What we do is we factorize by common factor, but we pair the terms because we are going to have 4 more terms. So what we are going to do is we are going to factorize these and then that separately. So we are pairing the terms. Now to factor, we are grouping the terms. That's why it's called grouping. So we are going to factor out 2 because it's the highest common factor of 2 and 2. So it's 2. Then we also factor out x because x is also appearing at both terms. And because each x is power to 1, we're just going to have the same x there, power to 1. Then we open our brackets. Here we are going to have 1y. I see that, okay, this term is exactly the same term that I have here. So I'm just going to have to say 2 divided by 2 is 1. But x, since it's all power to 1, it's gone. Then I move on to the next one. I write down my plus sign. I factor out 3 because it's the highest common factor of 3 and 3. I open my bracket. Here I'm left with y minus 1. And I close my bracket. I have factorized by common factor, but first I needed to group my terms. Now I'm not done. When I see that the whole idea was for you to create a common bracket, and you now continue by factoring. What it means is this is multiplied by that and this is also multiplied by that. So these two are multiplied by the same thing. So basically I can write these coefficients together. 2x, write down that sign, close it, open the bracket and close it. That's one bracket. It means these two terms are all multiplied. So I use this one of these to represent both because it's the common bracket. So I'm still factorizing by common factor, except that now my common factor is a bracket. It's a common bracket. So I'm going to have that. However, this you can also say this means was 2x times this whole thing plus 3 times that whole thing. So basically it can take you back there. So that's what you do in grouping. Please remember that you can pause the video and then you try B, then you come and continue the video. Now, to continue, we still need to group the terms. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to factorize this by common factor and then this by common factor as well. So I'm going to do that. I have 2 is the highest common factor of 2 and 8. Since there's m squared and m is the smaller one. So I open my bracket. 2 goes in itself 1 time. And since there's a variable that is going to be left there, there's no point in writing the 1. But I repeat, if 1 was the only thing that is left there, it needs to be written down. So I'm going to say m, I take it out of 2. I'm going to have just m, because I'm subtracting 1 from 2. Then I have my plus, 2 goes in 8 4 times. I close my bracket, then I write my plus sign. 3 is the highest common factor of 3 and 12, and then I'm going to be left with m plus 4, because 3 goes in 12 4 times. Now I see I have a common bracket, so I'm just going to say therefore my answer will be this plus that times the common bracket or common factor, which is that, and I'm done.